Okay, hi John, we are live. I am Kate Howe. I'm the co-founder of Postcards for Parents.
And I'm John Stewart. I'm a clinical psychologist and clinical director for Postcards for Parents, and happy to be here, Kate. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to see you today. And so today we're talking about sleep, which is an interesting topic because it's so fundamental to wellness. It's something that everybody hopefully does every day. And in some sense, we kind of take it for granted, and we have such strong habits around it, I think, that we may or may not kind of feel are optimal, or we may not have like consciously designed, or we may not even feel like we have kind of control. There's so many other things in our environment and our schedule that help determine that. But that's sort of why I think it's an interesting place to talk about with families, because kind of our like innate tendencies and our relational styles, I think, just kind of like come out here in a way that is pretty impactful, to our overall rhythms and well-being. So, I mean, for example, like if I think across my friend group, I know some families that put their small children to bed at 6 p.m. every day, and they would leave group outings, and they would organize their families around that. And I have other friends who sort of didn't seem to have any bedtime, or it was very late, and you're sort of like, how are those kids, not falling apart, but yet they weren't. So, I guess my first question would be, how much do you think these differences are biological, and how much are they, the result of either habit or environmental? Like, how do you kind of parse that?
Yeah, Kate, I mean, and I don't want to purport to be, an expert on sleep. I've read sleep. I work with the issues of sleep with kids and families quite often, but I could get out of my depth in terms of some of the physiology. But in response to your question, is it psychological? Is it related to patterns, or is it physiological, biological? Well, there's no question it's all three. And that a kind of misaligned variable associated with any one of the three can represent a pretty significant challenge to sleep. And I agree, sleep is absolutely critical. It is so restorative. It is fundamental to our ability to really be at our best. There are a lot of things that happen during the sleep phase. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but the idea that it is restorative and it's a time for integration of experience and thought and emotion that there's just no question about that. So when sleep is being disrupted by one of those three variables you mentioned a moment ago, by psychology, by anxiety, by fear, by those kinds of variables that can intrude into the sleep process for little ones and for adults, by patterns that change, related with changing time zones, of travel, parents who don't have much of a structured approach to their lives. And there's some wonderful people and kids who do really well with not highly structured parents. But we can say that sleep is something that does tend to fall into rhythms, and that if there's no ability to create rhythms for your kids, you're more likely to have kind of a chaotic pattern of sleep adjustment. I mean, you can take a child to the point where they're exhausted, and usually what happens when they're exhausted is they fall apart and then fall asleep. So you're much better off, figuring out what that pattern is and trying to stay within it to the best of your ability, recognizing sometimes you can't, and to have your kids go to bed before they're exhausted. Now, going to bed can mean many different things. It's almost always a ritual. There should be a ritual. It is something that requires a ritual, because I think it was Shakespeare referred to it as the death of the day. There is a loss. There is a going away. There is a bringing to an end of a day, of connections. Going to sleep is a bit of a psychological drama. And that if we don't think about it as such, we're going to miss some of the cues that we're going to need to be attuned to to be able to help our kids make that transition over to restful sleep.
So talk more about that psychological drama. Yeah, give us some more.
Well, I think that, if nothing, let's start out with just separation. Let's say with younger kids, infants, toddlers, even elementary school kids, depending on how their lives are going, what's going on, what are the stressors, how much are they reliant upon mom and dad's support at this particular moment to manage or regulate their emotions, to feel safe. And if we've got a youngster who's in a place where they're really needing that, the experience of anticipating the aloneness associated with the parent walking out of the room and kind of saying, "It's all yours now, buddy," that's complicated. And that's where rituals can be so helpful. Rituals help with transition. Rituals are a way of making something feel familiar, even though it's leading towards something that's somewhat unfamiliar. So, the psychological pieces, there's no question that whether you're a little one or you're a grown up, if you've got a lot on your mind, these minds have a way of, kind of taking off on their own and reflecting and anticipating. Very rarely does a unleashed mind, unless it's practiced in meditation and you've gotten really good at it, very rarely does the unleashed mind just lay there on the pillow and contemplate the moment. It's almost always reflecting and anticipating. And there's almost always something to be anxious about in either the reflection or the anticipation. So just understand that moving into that place of stepping away from parents, moving into being alone with oneself, alone with one's thoughts, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. And in a lot of cultures, that's not done for a long time. A lot of cultures, little ones are not expected to sleep without their parents present. They're just, and as a species coming up, with respect to evolution, this is pretty new stuff in the last 300-400 years, that we're all sleeping on a bear rug together on the floor, and it's not to say that we can't adjust and make it work, because we have to. But to say it's supposed to be easy, or it's going to be the same for each child, or the death of a day is a complicated thing.
So you bring up that interesting point about just human history. So I know that there's a couple things around that. One is clocks and schedules. Clocks didn't used to exist, and we used to kind of follow the light of the day, and there was more flexibility, and like a farming or a hunter-gathering schedule. And so the need to be at school at 8 o'clock, or the need to be at work at 9 o'clock, and kind of not be able to adjust that, and not be able to kind of take a nap during the day. So that's kind of new. And I have also read that it's really the anticipation of feeling tired the next day that actually produces anxiety that then makes people unable to sleep if they so it's kind of like a negative cycle in that way.
No, absolutely. And I think there can be anxiety on the part of the child who's laying there going, should I call for mom now? Should I call for mom now? Should I call for mom now? And am I going, and hopefully somewhere before they call for mom, they fall asleep, they doze off. But that's an interesting thing, because I know if I call for mom, she's not going to be thrilled to see me at this moment.
Yeah, so that's an interesting. So I guess just jumping into that kind of tangent, as a parent, most after your kids go to bed is kind of maybe the first time in the day that you have for yourself that you can really relax. Either maybe you're still getting stuff done, or maybe you're just relaxing. But everybody needs that.
You're seeing your partner.
You're seeing your partner, yeah. So there, I know from a parent's point of view that there is like a relief and a sort of like looking forward to your kids being in bed, despite how much you love and enjoy them. Yeah. So when a child does call for you later, or does get up, how do you recommend dealing with that? Like if you have frustration, disappointment, you don't want them to be there, but yet, you can't, that's not probably the most productive thing to express to your child. But nor do you want it to be too warm and fuzzy, because then they might get used to it, right? I mean,
that's, I think that's your concern. I think that we contemporary humans, we were really impacted by B.F. Skinner and his notion that behaviors are largely associated with reinforcement, either positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and that we can get really apprehensive about, oh my God, if I feed into this, it's just going to lead to the next thing the next day, the same thing the next day. And it's not that there isn't some small bit of truth to that. That can be the truth. But if we understand that a child is having a hard time making that transition to sleep, then, similar to the child having a hard time making the transition to school, I don't want to get on the bus, I don't want to get on the bus. Damn it, you better get on the bus. It's really not the best way to make their next experience with the bus be less anxiety. Okay?
Oh, it's not?
It's not. I don't think so. My kids still made it through school. So I think that it is one of those moments that requires a lot of attunement. The ability to go into the little one's room and say, you're having a hard time being present, you're having a hard time sleeping, sweetie. Yeah, I can. I'm thinking about this, or I'm thinking about that, or whatever. And then you say, oh, that can be hard sometimes. Hey, why don't I? Because I want you to learn how to go to sleep, because that's going to be so much nicer if you learn how to go to sleep without me here. But right now you kind of need me, and that's okay. So look, I'm going to look at my watch, and I want you to lay there, and I'm going to rub your back for 3 minutes. But boy, do everything you can to fall asleep in those 3 minutes, because it may be hard at the end of it if I leave and you're still awake. So do what you can, and that may work, may not. You may leave and they may yell for you again in another 30 seconds. It is one of those situations where the kind of finding that range of optimal challenge is important. And that if we under-challenge them, we just say, well, I'm going to sleep with you. You can sleep in my bed for the rest of time, which happens sometimes. That's probably under-challenging. And when we under-challenge kids, they don't develop a belief in their own capacities. So we want them to believe that they have, you and I in our overall model, we talk about, the two pillars as being connection and evolving capability. And we want them to believe in both aspects of themselves, how they are fundamentally lovable and loved, and how they have this evolving kind of competency that allows them to more and more rely upon themselves. So sleep is one of the things that falls into that category as much as anything else. We want them to grow in their ability to sleep. Rituals, reading stories, drinking some warm milk, anything that lying on the bed and telling a story together, whatever the story, whatever your family's ritual is, you do what you can to do that and honor it. I think you can also, I've seen parents do things like, and this doesn't always work, but you're learning to be in there without me coming back in, and 3 times a week you can get me to come back in. So here are the 3 chips on your bed, but don't use them if you don't need them, because it's going to be hard if you've already used them. And sometimes little things like that can be helpful. I mean, you can try any kind of strategy. You can have fun with it. I've had parents go to the grocery store with their kids and pick out 2 types of breakfast cereals. One that is the one the parents would like them to eat, and 2 is the one that's horrible that they want to eat. And they say, look, sweetie, if they're calling you in 4 times a night and say, you need me to come in just once a night, you get the top shelf, your choice cereal. If I have to come in twice, well, then I'm not going to starve you, old buddy, but you're going to have to eat your regular cereal. So I'm doing this just to make it a little easier, so you can talk to yourself and say, all right, I can do it. I want a good cereal in the morning. I want a good. The idea of talking to themselves, is an important thing. And for kids, to teach them to talk to themselves, teach them to say, I'm okay, you're going to go to sleep before long. That's just, some will do it and some won't. Some are really shy about it and uncomfortable with it. But when you build in some sort of reinforcement, you don't want to think about that as the silver bullet. And when they get up the next morning and they had to wait and they got you 5 times and they don't get the good cereal, always go to that with, oh, sweetie, I'm sorry. I bet you can get it tomorrow. How's that? Okay, I bet you can. But not today, Pumpkin. You didn't do what you needed to do. And we're going to keep working on it. And if you have any ideas of things that would make it easier, some kids have rituals where they stack up 30 different stuffed animals all around them. It looks like some sort of tribal, ceremony. Some kids want the same story read over and over and over. Some kids want their light on. Some kids want their light off. Some kids want to hear a story and to fall asleep to an audio book. The one thing we don't ever want to do is shame kids for having a hard time with the fears and the loss of what going to bed is about. We don't want to do that. It's just, it can be too hard for kids. We don't want to do that.
Okay, so there's so many interesting things to pick up on in there, but just the first one in terms of an overall kind of framework is what I'm hearing is that it's sort of like you want your child to know that you're always there if they need you and connected, but you have confidence in there and you are expecting their kind of evolving ability to go to sleep. Yeah,
that it's going to be that you're excited about it for them. Because that's a great skill. Look at your little baby brother. He can't do that. Anything you can do that kind of, makes it so that it feels like something that's really for them as much as for you.
Yeah. Okay. And all right. So I have a couple questions on what you said. I guess one is just a quick clarification in terms of the cereal and the idea of rewards. And I know that there's kind of like it's a spectrum and a gray area. And so you said we don't want to lean on the reward, but it's sort of like a nice extra. How do you think about incorporating rewards as part of parenting, I guess?
Okay, keep going, Kate. I'm
just talking about the breakfast cereal, it sort of sounds like if and I know that there's been a lot of research contra the B.F. Skinner idea that sort of when you give rewards, then people stop doing the thing for itself. They start doing it for the reward. And, but I know that, but it's also.
Or Kate, they also, the dynamic that they are pursuing is so powerful that they move very quickly into a damn the torpedoes. They don't care. And they're confident. I don't care about the stupid reward. I feel this right now.
Okay, so then back to the example of kind of like an exciting breakfast cereal. How does that reward play into kind of the overall scheme?
Well, I mean, I think it's something that the child is able to lie there and go, oh yeah, I bought Captain Crunch at the grocery store, and I know I'm looking forward to it. It's just something that's kind of a pleasant thing to focus on. As opposed to worrying or about the past or the future. It's just it has a nice kind of soothing motivation. Motivation does, I don't think I would have ever gotten through graduate school or any other school if it weren't for the fact that I was terribly frightened of failing. So motivation, it can move us. I think we just want to be careful about moving into, you and I have talked sometimes before between a relational versus a transactional relationship between you and your child. Transactional is not what you want. When kids get a sense that it's transactional, they will oftentimes, that's when they'll say, damn the torpedoes, I don't care if I get Captain Crunch. But when it's relational and they have a sense that, hey, we're doing this because maybe this is going to help. Maybe this will be easier for you, old buddy, sweetie, or whatever, Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. We'll try it for a few days, And so you're not placing your belief in the idea that the cereal is what's going to change them. The cereal they make it a little bit easier. It's
sort of like a cherry on top.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And then I was also interested by the idea of talking to themselves, which you mentioned, which in my daughter's second step at school, their social emotional curriculum, self-talk is one of the first things that they learn. And I'm curious how to kind of encourage that without it seeming like without it seeming
the best way to encourage it is to have them see you do it for yourself in your moments, in your difficult moments. It's like a lot of things they're caught, they're not taught. A lot of what our kids develop in terms of emotional skills, emotional capacities. So I think, and then you can say, I talk to myself sometimes, sweetie. And I was reading something the other day that was kind of interesting, that they were showing that when you speak to yourself, if you're saying, I can do this, it's nowhere near as effective, or I don't know if it's nowhere near, but it's supposedly not as effective as bringing on an observer's perspective that you can do this. I know you can do this. I've seen you do this sort of stuff. That it says that it activates the social brain when you use the pronoun you versus the first person pronoun. So some of this stuff, it could be gimmicky. It's going to work for some kids. Some of it's going to be placebo. And some kids, it's just some of the stuff's going to fall into place. But far and away, the best way to do it is to let them see you do it, is to let them catch that as a strategy. You can coach it a bit. I'm not saying never coach it, but it can be something that, there's a somewhat negative, before we had wireless headphones, there was a somewhat negative connotation to people walking around and talking to themselves. Now there's a whole lot of that going on.
Yes.
When parents are able to demonstrate with some degree of playfulness is so helpful. With some degree of playfulness, their own pattern of talking to themselves, it mitigates some of that. This is a little weird, and or your bunny can talk to you. Why don't you have a conversation with your stuffed bunny? Those things are good too.
So in that kind of instance where either your child's resisting going to bed or they've woken up after being in bed for a little while, would you kind of share a story? Would you say, oh, when I have trouble sleeping and my mind is racing, I will, tell myself that I'm safe and my body's tired, so I can just go to sleep or something like that? I mean, is that
absolutely like that?
Rather than suggesting that they do it, telling a story.
You do it with them. You can do your own version, and then because all right, sweetie, when you go back to bed, it's kind of hard for mom to fall back to sleep. So I'm going to practice. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say to myself. I'm going to say to myself, I had a really nice visit with Susie just a moment ago, but she's going back and she's going to have a good night's sleep. And now I'm going to have a good night's sleep. I just need to close my eyes and let it happen. And that, and you can have them tell you what their story is going to be. And they're, and they may say, I had such a nice visit with mom. I never wanted to end, So, I mean, don't, kids have a way of not wanting to give up that special closeness of those moments. I just saw a parent last week who has an adolescent. At some point, we'll move into talking about teenagers down the road and sleep, because they're different. They've got a pretty complicated situation. But I was talking to a parent. She said her very shy son, who doesn't talk much, she got up in the middle of the night. He was in his room watching YouTubes or something on dogs. I don't know what the hell it was. And she decided to just go in there and sit with him and get him to tell her what he's looking at. Not to tell her what's wrong, but to just look at the dogs with him. And she said, I ended up spending 2 of the best hours I've spent with my son in the last 2 years. That there are those moments where sometimes you just have to take them, because the tenderness of that moment can be very, very, powerful. Now, does that mean that your kid's not going to want to do the same thing tomorrow? They might. Skinner wasn't altogether wrong about that, but you manage it. You work through it.
So I guess maybe a more intense issue in that scenario when a child wakes up in the night, and I'll speak from my own experience. My daughter would come in and sort of be afraid about bad guys breaking into the house. Fear, I probably inspired by some story or some movie, but it wasn't even like something she had just watched right before bed. It was just a more global thing. And we would connect and we would cuddle, but it sort of seemed like she was dwelling on it. It was like she didn't want to move away from that story. And I don't know if it was like a way to not have to go back to bed, or if it was like, if that was really kind of, if the story was that gripping to her. But I'm curious how you kind of deal with that.
I think that, nightmares, night terrors, well, they're different, but scary dreams, nightmares, they're real. I mean, the kids are stirred by them, and they need our help to downregulate their central nervous system's response to it if they're going to be able to fall back asleep. And that, we've talked with the PACE acronym, just the importance that may not be a time when you want to do a lot of playfulness, because the child's probably the combination of being sleepy, not fully awake, and scared. It's not a time when playfulness is going to be particularly helpful. But the A and the C of PACE, the acceptance, is the child tells you about their dream, and maybe they won't be able to, or maybe they won't want to. And you work with that to the best of your ability, and being curious about it. And that, oh boy, what do you do? That's scary. Why do you think that is there anything going on that you think made you think of that tonight? No, I don't think so. So sometimes that's how it is, sweetie. Why don't you just lay here next to me and fall asleep? And when you fall asleep, either I or Dad, somebody will carry you back into your room. I think nightmares they're an issue, and you don't want to leave a frightened kid alone. That's clearly my perspective on it. You could have somebody else who might say, well, you're under challenging, you're coddling, you're doing any of those things. Really upset and scared kids, they need our attention, and they need to have no sense of shame about it. And then if they get a little bit in the pattern of it, well, then we figure out how to stretch it out. We take that on, but we don't want to go to a place of saying, you just got to go manage this one until you've done a fair amount of helping them co-regulate that emotional response.
So I have a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of emotional tension that might not get processed during the day might come up more at night.
Absolutely.
And what happens then if fear or tension comes up at night that you then don't help them process at night? Where might it go? And
well, I don't think you want to know.
Yeah.
It'll go somewhere, and that being present for someone we love is not about being on a schedule to be timely in your presence. I mean, you learn that in my work. I'm on call a lot of the time, and the more people are aware of the fact that they could call me at any hour, the less I get called.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just I think that people want to have their own sense of ability to move through something, but they also kind of need to know that if it really hits the fan, I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
I've got somebody I can bring in. So, if it's, there are going to be things, social dynamics, they're going to be, successes, failures, things that do come to youngsters in their sleep. And then, you have to kind of look at their emotional response to what came to them to determine how much energy and time you really need to give to it at that moment. It always kind of goes back to that really difficult reality. We have to be attuned to what they need, and that's hard. It's hard when we're tired. It's hard, those are tough moments, but they're important moments.
You talked before about rituals and great kind of like transition and getting ready for sleep rituals. Are there rituals that you have encountered over the years for kind of releasing emotions, kind of like ways to get kids to kind of talk about what might be bothering them or something like that in a regular fashion, so doesn't just come up randomly?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kate. I mean, I think what you choose to read, I think books that have some age-appropriate angst, running through them, not, nothing, Diary of the Wimpy Kid or things like that you just got to.
I hate those books, but
yeah, I get it, but there are I don't think there's anything in particular. I remember when my son was 4 and we had our daughter, our second child, that we'd read Goodnight Moon, and that was a ritual, and we'd usually read something else, and then he'd go to bed, and the way that he would end every night would be he had a little record player, and we'd put this record on, and it was a Sesame Street record, and the song was by Oscar the Grouch, and Oscar was singing, "What can a baby do? Nothing." He can lie there, he could cry. Oscar's just railing. Apparently a baby came to Sesame Street and everybody was so taken by an Oscar was annoyed by it. And so every night, last thing before he went to bed, as he struggled with the loss of his mom's, being the singular center of his mom's world, he got to hear Oscar lamenting with him how really useless babies are. I think that you use your own creativity, and some of it is it's magic, and magic means that you believe in it. The old the 1, 2, 3 magic behavior management program. Are you familiar with that, Kate?
Yeah. Maybe.
Well, it's you teach kids that, all right, mom's gonna or dad's gonna count to 3, and then magic. 1,
okay.
2.
There's different. Okay, yeah. There's different counting to.
But you know what? Magic isn't defined.
Okay.
It's the vast majority of kids, they get to 3 and they go, "Oh man, I don't want magic." And that's helpful. I mean, I think that just from a standpoint of your magic is in your believing and selling something as being helpful in getting through the night, getting to sleep. So it's I guess it's the equivalent to a parental placebo, but we're not giving them pills. That's
right. Yeah, that's interesting. That's good to keep in mind, and that it's about the relationship again and your belief in it, and you're kind of having this moment with them where you're both believing in the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned teenagers before, and I do want to talk about that. I'm curious. What goes on with teenagers about sleep?
Well, they begin, the vast majority of them, they're circadian, the rhythm shifts to a much later time of going to sleep. They can't go to sleep at 9 or 10. Many of them just cannot. And then you've got the whole peer culture, and they're texting each other. There's the role of digital, of electronic communication and such is problematic related to sleep, but so are incredible battles with parents problematic. It has to be. It's one of the most common things that I talk with parents about, with adolescents about, is how do you manage electronic media, and how do you manage it at bedtime? And there isn't a single answer to that. You manage it in a way that supports your kid and doesn't destroy your relationship. That doesn't mean it doesn't stress the relationship. There's a big difference between stressing the relationship and having what you're doing result in a total eruption that doesn't remit over time as you stay. Maybe you say, all right, we're going to stay with the pattern and see if we can get it. And sometimes you do that. I'm not saying you never choose something and have a kid have an initial really lousy reaction to it, and it doesn't end, and you just try to walk beside them, stay with them emotionally to the best of your ability, and then move through it. But just the recognition that, even things, and once again, I'm not a sleep expert, but things like realizing that teenagers probably need to sleep till noon on Saturday and Sunday, particularly if they're having to get to school at 7:30 or 8, and that there is some capacity to make up for some of the sleep loss, because many teenagers are not going to sleep till 12 or 1, and they're getting up at 5:30, and that's not good. A lot of schools are changing their start time for older kids, and they absolutely should, from my perspective.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you also can't get into a sleep battle with a teenager. It's just, you got to figure out how to stay with them. They don't want to be tired, and it's fundamentally hard for them to. I think one of the things that as we've dealt with COVID this year, and we've had more and more kids having very different kinds of schedules, there are kids who have thrived with that, and I think it's partially because of the way in which they're able to manage sleep differently.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this earlier before. Do you feel like so if a parent didn't kind of set limits, and I guess this varies by age, I'm curious how it does, but will a child, in the absence of kind of having to get up for school or, other kind of artificial things, will they self-regulate, or is that something that a parent really has to do?
You mean, will the child adapt to a schedule that makes sense?
Yeah, will they get enough sleep on their own?
Probably not.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that getting into World War III over something you can't control, because you cannot make a kid go to sleep. And you want to watch a kid feel hopeless and misunderstood. Have it be a kid who, normal adolescent angst, maybe some biological, just lies there and cannot sleep for 2 hours. He cannot fall asleep until he's exhausted at 1 o'clock. And you tell him that he's got to do it. And you have no choice but to just lie there and try it. It's almost sadistic. And there are kids who genuinely cannot do it. And so then you got to try to figure out, and then you may talk about naps, but then naps create a problem because they actually, make it harder to go to sleep. You may end up talking to your doctor about the use of things like melatonin. Certainly rituals, again, though, are helpful for teenagers to kind of buy into some ritual as being a useful process for them. Sometimes mindfulness exercises, and I'll tell you probably the most troubling pattern that I have seen in the last few years with older high school students, and certainly college students, and a lot of adults, is they smoke pot at night to be able to go to sleep. And in the absence of that, they can't do it. And that makes a parent of a 17-year-old feel great when they know their kid is sneaking out the window to smoke pot to be able to come back and go to sleep. I think in those situations, you really, you got to deal with it as a sleep issue. And you got to talk to your doctor, and you got to look for avenues of support. I'm not saying you deal with it like, oh, this is great. I'm not saying that for a moment, but you don't want to have this kind of harsh edge as your kid tries to figure out what the hell to do with the fact that he's got to get up at 6 o'clock. His mind is racing, and it's 1 o'clock, and he can't sleep.
And in these scenarios that you're talking about, is screen use kind of causing a lot of that, or is this after you've
I think it's a good question. I don't think screen use is the predominant variable. I think that adolescents, just for a lot of different reasons, adolescent brains are different. They're in this pruning process of narrowing down the number of neuron channels. They are they are in the process of psychosexual kind of leveling, kind of getting comfortable and aware of all those thoughts and feelings. There's just a lot going on for those guys. Their bodies are oftentimes growing. They got a lot going on, and so I think to villainize screens is probably not that useful. Not that they aren't sometimes a problem, but they are also, for a lot of kids, they're the answer to the problem. Instead of lying there alone, feeling alone and sad, they're texting back and forth with their friend who's lying there alone and sad. And give me two kids lying there alone and sad, texting back and forth, over two kids just lying there alone and sad in terms of their long-term development any day.
Huh. Even if they're keeping each other awake by texting back and
forth? They're probably not keeping each other awake.
Okay.
They may be, and that may, and so as a parent, as you deal with that, just don't get dogmatic. Don't act like you know what's going on. You don't, stay in that pace mode, and just help them, because your kid hates getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to school because he only had 5.5 hours of sleep. And so be empathic with him about that. Don't say, well, what do you think is going to happen? You got 5.5 hours of sleep. I saw you up on your phone until then. It's just, that's just, the kid doesn't know how to manage it.
Yeah.
And we don't really know how to manage it, but we can become we can get into a strong arm stance with it. And it's just kind of, that's not good for anybody. It's not good for anybody's sleep. That's for sure.
So I think those are all the questions that I had. Are there other things that have come to your mind over the conversation that we haven't talked about?
I mean, I think other than Kate, every kid's different. They really are, and every parent has different strengths and weaknesses in dealing with this stuff. I'm not suggesting that you don't early on structure your kids' sleep. It is very difficult to have not structured it much. Have them reach, 16, 15, and you've never really had them have a ritual around bedtime, and now they're having a hard time falling asleep before midnight, and you start trying to have a ritual around their sleep. I mean, so do what you can to kind of keep that early on. I think that, and forcing kids to go to bed, I mean, they can have that sense that they are being, cast off, and so it's not a little drama. It's a relatively big drama. It's a big part of our lives. And so, I know I'm not giving a lot of concrete answers. All I'm saying is figure it out, stay with your kid to figure it out together, and realize that, nobody wants that to go poorly. With little ones or older ones, with infants. Yeah. With infants, I'm not a big fan of letting infants cry it out. I mean, you can let them cry it out for a little while, but you spend all day long trying to convince this little one that they're safe because you're there and you're present. You're going to know what their needs are, and then you put them down, and all of a sudden, it's just so startlingly different. I'm not saying that's a terrible thing to do, or it's never. There are almost no absolutes with any of this, other than you got to absolutely try to figure out what it is that your kid needs.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I've really heard, I mean, I think it's just important to be conscious, first of all, that it is a big deal. And so it's not something that you can just expect to happen on autopilot, or that if you just, I hear some parents saying, oh, now that they're in second grade, they can put themselves to bed. Or if that's not happening, to kind of like yell down, why haven't you gotten your pajamas on? You know what I mean? To kind of think that you'll be able to wash your hands of it soon. So if we know that that's not the case, and you know that it's something you have to kind of consciously figure out together, then I think that sounds like half the battle. And then
I think it's one of the most precious times between a parent.
So great. Yeah. So then it's like even going further than, oh, I have to do this. It's like, well, I get to have this connection time.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's a second piece is how, either how can you create rituals that you as a parent also enjoy, and, or, you know, how can you get in the mind space? What do you need to do to find that time special as well?
Yeah. And stay flexible.
Let me ask you just one more question on that. Do you feel like if you're able to kind of like really make it a time of connection, where as a parent, you know the difference, whether you've really been there, whether you've really felt connected, does that kind of alleviate? Does that then make it easier for your child to go to sleep, going from like a real connection to a separation versus like a pseudo connection to?
I would say categorically yes. Okay. And with some kids, they're still going to struggle with it some. But there is no question that connection, in anticipation of not seeing one another and being able to say, you know, when you wake up tomorrow morning, I expect to see you climbing into my bed, or, you know, something that just says, you know, it is a separation. It's not forever. And I'm going to be excited.
Give them a bridge to the other side.
Yeah, to the other side. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
Yeah. And parents, good luck. It's not an easy dynamic. It just isn't. All right, Kate, you take good care.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.